Hey YouTube, glad you made it back to the channel. Today I'd like to tell you guys about the very publicized recent carjacking in Central Florida. If you haven't heard of it, this is the case of a homestead woman whose carjacking and kidnapping was caught on a terrifying video clip. Today we'll be reviewing the clip as well as the entire case, while I give you guys my insight into the investigation. For those who don't know, my name is Blue, and I'm a Florida police officer with 10 years of experience. And as always, these are just my own opinions based on my own experiences, not the opinions of any department or organization. With all that said, let's get into it. Today's case starts in Homestead, Florida. On Thursday, April 11, 31-year-old Katherine Aguavivas told her husband that she was traveling to Central Florida to visit her family members. Katherine had immigrated 5 years ago from the Dominican Republic and was a U.S. citizen who was just 4 days shy of celebrating her 32nd birthday. Now, it was reported by news outlets and released during a press conference with the Seminole County Sheriff himself, Dennis Lemma, that Katherine had been making this trip to the Central Florida area to visit her family members. But as the investigation would later reveal, Katherine has no known family in the Central Florida area at all. We'll speak more on that in just a bit. So for whatever reason, Katherine begins to drive north in her white Dodge Durango SUV. At 2 p.m., she is seen in the area of Jupiter, Florida, about 2 hours or so north of Homestead. At approximately 3:30 to 4 p.m., Katherine stops at a Shell gas station in Seminole County, where she spends about 8 minutes fueling up before leaving. Now the sheriff here says that she leaves the main roads, taking the back roads, and weaves around them for a short period of time. Police believe that around a half a mile away from the intersection where the camera footage would later show the crime, Katherine notices that she is being followed by what is now known to be an older model green Acura, which is ramming into the back of her, likely in an attempt to get her to stop. So here's where things get weird. Katherine calls her husband and tells him, "Hey, this car is following me and ramming into me. What do I do?" And Katherine's husband claims that he told her just not to stop the car. But we have to ask ourselves, just don't stop? That's the only advice he gave her? He did not tell her to call the police, to try and get to a public crowded area, and he did not call the police himself. According to the sheriff, neither of them called the police at any time. Keep that in mind for later. So, Katherine eventually comes to a stop at a red light, which again is strange. You and I likely would not stop for a red light if someone was following and ramming us like this. But she does, and the video tells the rest of the story. Let's take a look. As you can see, a person gets out with a gun, approaches her driver's side door, and appears to order her to open it. Afterwards, and after a little bit of what I can imagine is back and forth talking, the person gets inside her rear driver's side seat. Katherine's vehicle and the suspect vehicle behind it then make a U-turn, and that's where the video ends. Just imagine how bold a criminal has to be to do something like this. I personally don't doubt for a second this is because criminals know how severely understaffed police departments have become in the last decade. There are just simply not enough of us out on the streets. Thank God this person called the police to report this, and had this video to give them. Now let's take a look at the clip from the Seminole County Sheriff himself, as he outlines the path the cars are believed to have taken next.
She makes a U-turn at that intersection, probably heading, speculation here, but probably heading in a direction where the suspect does not want them to go, and we suspect that he orders her to turn around again and reapproach the intersection of East Lake and Tuscola Road. At that intersection, they turn south, and they're heading southbound, nearly rush hour traffic here, southbound on Tuscola Road towards the Seminole-Orange County line, all the way down to Aloma. When they get to Aloma, they make a left. They go all the way across all lanes of traffic so they can get on 417 southbound. At this time, we suspect that Katherine is still driving under the armed dictatorship of the suspect. Here's where you're going to go, here's where you're going to drive. They drive southbound on 417, likely getting off at the Narcoossee Road exit. They travel the back roads of Narcoossee, ultimately turning off onto Boggy Creek Road into Osceola County, where there is a newer construction area that was set off in a little bit of a distance, but not so far away that eyewitnesses could not report hearing gunshots and ultimately the smoke of a fire that was set ablaze.
Now, here's the aerial footage of the site where the remains of a burnt car were eventually found, which contained a very badly burnt corpse. According to the sheriff, the car was so badly burnt that it was unrecognizable to investigators, and the body also so badly burnt that the only way to make a positive identification is going to be dental or DNA records. Now, this vehicle would be discovered when yet another call for service came in, reporting shots fired and a vehicle fire. 12 10mm shell casings were discovered on scene, indicating that the decedent was likely executed by gunfire, then burnt in the car in an attempt to dispose of the evidence. From the time police received the call of the kidnapping to the call of the vehicle fire and gunshots, an hour and 45 minutes had passed. So let's get back into one of the main questions police still have. What was Katherine doing in Central Florida? Remember, the earliest reports indicate that she was supposedly visiting family. Let's hear the sheriff explain the problems with this.
Follow-up investigation. The initial report that was provided to us was Katherine was traveling to Central Florida to visit with family members. We know of no family members that are living in Central Florida. The time that she was in Seminole County was less than an hour, and we have no knowledge of her or the suspect, quite frankly, living, doing business, or being in Seminole County prior to this incident.
Now, you'll notice that he says they have no indication of the victim or the suspect living in or doing business in Seminole County before this. I'm assuming that based on this, they do have a suspect identified, as they did have some good investigative leads based on the car description and a partial tag to go on. But to police, the mystery remains as to why Katherine was even there. Now, I have my theories, as we'll soon get into. Police believe that the suspects knew exactly who they were looking for, that this was a targeted crime and not a random act of violence. Now, either one is possible, but based on the totality of circumstances, they seem to have more than enough evidence to conclude the former, something I agree with. Police are still looking for anyone who has information on the green Acura as seen here. Now, police have not released a theory of their own as to why Katherine was targeted, but I think we all have our own ideas. Based on my own experiences, let me try to explain my thoughts. Let's recap quickly. Katherine travels from Homestead to Seminole County, a drive of just under 300 miles, taking about 4 hours. That's pretty substantial, but a drive that many of us would make for family or vacation. But as we said above, the real reason Katherine drove is still unknown. Remember, we have not gotten this information from her, but likely just her husband. If I had to guess, Katherine's family, both in the US and abroad, probably didn't even know about this trip. That leaves us with several possible options. The first option is that Katherine lied to her husband and went for other reasons, which could be reasons like her having an affair. I'm not saying there's any proof of this, just something that may be possible. The second reason, of course, is that the husband was lying and that Katherine was going up there for something else. In my opinion, this seems to be the most likely reason, and if I had to guess, it was for something illegal. My personal theory, and this is just a theory, not an attempt to smear the good name of the recently deceased, is that drugs were involved. Now, I'm making this theory with minimal information, but I would assume that Katherine was either transporting drugs or going to pick them up. But based on the carjacking and being followed, it would seem likely that she had already had them in the vehicle if this theory holds water. This would explain her being followed and the armed kidnapping that takes place. Drug deals go bad all the time, and drug dealers getting ripped off happen just as often. Many times, these incidents end in violence and murder. This could be a reason that neither Katherine nor her husband made the decision to call the police. Keep in mind, we don't know if the husband was on the phone when Katherine was taken and during the whole ordeal, or if he hung up after giving his advice. But it seems mind-blowing to me that he would hang up after what his wife had just told him about being followed and rammed, regardless of drugs being involved. But either way, after hearing that information, he did not call the police. And this is very telling. And finally, the third option is a more out there theory that I have seen people put forth, that Katherine was the victim of a hit, possibly by her husband. People think this because when someone is murdered, in a staggering amount of cases, the killer is the spouse. But we can't just assume that of everyone baselessly. However, Katherine was driving a car, in my opinion, that stood out a lot. A Dodge Durango is a pretty large SUV, and a white one is actually pretty rare, at least in my experience. On top of that, the rear window had a huge for sale decal on it, with what the media has reported as the husband's phone number on display. If you had hired a hitman, this would be an exceptionally easy vehicle to see and follow from a distance in traffic. Also, on that note, think about when you drive, especially on long trips. How many of you actually pay attention to whether or not you're being followed, especially on road trips? Her being followed could explain why police suspected her of driving down all these small back roads, perhaps in an attempt to lose them. But, for argument's sake, it could also be possible that the subjects in the green Acura saw Katherine pick up something valuable from a house in that area, and then began to follow her. In either event, they chose to take her to a secluded place, execute her, and burn the evidence. Some would say this is reminiscent of how the cartel would operate, again implying a connection with drugs. Of course, there is still minimal information for me to say with any kind of certainty that any of these theories are true. But if I had to guess, I would definitely assume that the husband is lying about why Katherine was there, and that she was engaged in some type of illegal activity, which would explain the refusal to call the police under these circumstances. Well, what do you guys think? I really love hearing and reading all of your theories, so make sure to leave them down in the comments. Either way, let's let the investigation run its course before coming to any concrete conclusions. And as always, we'll be following this case to see the eventual outcome. If there is an arrest made, I'll do another video going over the arrest form with you all. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking and subscribing. I post at least once a week and cover a variety of true crime topics, all from the perspective of a cop. And with that said, I'll see you guys for the next one. And as always, stay safe and stay tuned.